Thank you, Mr. Delpech, for a very inspiring session on the challenges facing a company like Sonepar, and in particular for the highlights on sustainability and the sustainability transition. So welcome, everybody. I will be your session moderator for this first panel. Our discussion will be today, during this panel, it will focus on sustainability, the circular economy, how wholesalers contribute within their ecosystems, what are the key obstacles, and how the European Union can help them. So we just heard from Mr. Delpech the importance for a wholesaler like Sonepar to invest in sustainability. The Commission has announced a series of actions supporting the move towards a more circular economy. The idea is to maintain the value of products and materials as long as possible. Moving to a circular economy model is a significant challenge. It entails a fundamental change in the business models. For example, when looking at products, how to define sustainable products, services, leasing, aftermarket, repair, infrastructure, efficient waste collection, sorting, recycling, and people, consumers, and skills. The discussion will be interactive. You can raise your question to panelists using Slido. Our discussion partners this afternoon will be Dorothee Arns, Director General, European Association of Chemical Distributors, Salamari Muronen, CEO of the Finnish Electrotechnical Trade Association, Thierry Meunier, Executive Director, Chief Financial and Innovation Officer at Nexus Automotive International, and William Neal, there you are, Advisor for Circular Economy in the European Commission's DG Environment. So I will ask the wholesalers' representatives here to briefly introduce your organization and sector, and in 2 minutes, spell out what the circular economy means for your business or your sector, and why this is a priority for you. Dorothee, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you for your kind introduction, Crystal, and thank you to Eurocommerce for having me today. So 3 minutes to introduce quickly what chemical distributors are doing. So we are basically between chemical manufacturers and the next industries who use our products. We partly also produce, because we take what the manufacturers produce and formulate it or blend it, package it. So we have all sorts of different value chain activities with us. So we are also active in many different segments, ranging from petrochemicals and fuels to life sciences like pharmaceuticals. And the sector itself stands for 30 billion of annual turnover and for 30,000 highly qualified jobs. So that's briefly what our sector stands for. What circular economy means for us is, first of all, a competitive advantage, a business model, but also resource efficiency. We are a sector which is predominantly dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises, in many cases family-owned businesses, which have their roots in their respective regions for generations. So, and strong roots to the neighborhood anyhow. So it comes already with the tradition. And to keep a sound and sustainable business and also the environment in place for next generations. So that's for us a commitment. And since we compete globally and also with a lot of direct sales from producers directly to other customers, we always have to be better than the rest of the world and to be quick to respond to upcoming trends and to make sure that we always act in a sound and sustainable way. So that's it in a nutshell.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Dorothee. Salamari, from an electrotechnical point of view in Finland.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for Eurocommerce as well as the EUEW for having us to represent the wholesalers on the electrotechnical field. STK, which is the Finnish Electrotechnical Wholesalers Association, is probably due to the Nordic pragmatism, we are one of those associations that represent both the wholesalers as well as the manufacturers and importers on this field in Finland. And we have been together for 90 years now, so we're celebrating our anniversary later this year. Our take on successful circular economy is simply that it's a combination of activities over the life cycle of the product supported with relevant digitalized data. So I claim that there cannot really be an efficient way of doing circular economy on our field either without data. And that I hope we will be talking about also later with this panel.
So thank you for raising the importance of digitalization and data for circularity. Thierry Meunier, from the automotive spare parts wholesale perspective. Hello, Thierry. I will suggest that we ask William to share your perspective. So from a Commission perspective, what are your priorities and how what is the Commission doing to support the move towards the circular economy?
Yes, thanks, Crystal, and thanks to Doris and Salamaria. I hope that we managed to get our other guest back. Yeah, I mean, first, what is the circular economy? I think it's important. I mean, there are still many misconceptions, I think, around the panel here. Everybody's on the right line, but I think that it's important to remind that it is tackling many things. What you could do, I mean, I like to imagine it as a big river, of resources flowing through the economy. And they arrive upstream as bioresources and minerals and metals and so on, and chemicals. And they exit the other end as waste and emissions. And it's what we do with them whilst they're in the economy which matters, and that's what provides well-being and value and profits. And we have four possibilities, in my view, during that period. One is what I think it was Dorothea was emphasizing, which is the resource efficiency. We can narrow the flows. So just like we've seen, I mean, labor productivity has been really driven by higher labor prices. And I think that higher resource prices and more scarcity will drive resource productivity. And there are huge there's huge potential there. I mean, I heard that a modern building, mostly modern buildings, probably require about 30% less steel and cement than they actually have in them. So we can really, at the design stage, do a lot there. So that's narrowing the flows. Then we can slow down the flows, and it's I equate to sort of making the river into more of a lake. And the idea is to keep the products and assets that embody all of those resources in the economy for longer. So that means designing them to last longer, to be durable, providing spares and services so that you can upgrade, repair, refurbish, reuse and remanufacture those products and assets. Thirdly, we can use regenerative flows, so we can use more renewable and bio-based resources. And lastly, and it is the last one, and this is the misconception about circular economy very frequently, is by recycling those material flows. But of course, once you've created the waste, then you've lost most of the value already. So, you know, we need to avoid getting to that stage for as long as we can. So that is how we see circular economy. And all of those four have an economic logic and can be driven by profit. Where there is value, where you're retaining value, there are possibilities to profit. But they do involve challenging the linear models that we have today, which are based on sort of shifting stuff, which I think, of course, wholesale is very much involved in that model. But I think wholesalers also have a lot of potential to move to more circular models and are very important in that. If I'm not, tell me if I'm going on too much, Christel, but I could say a little bit about what the Commission is doing now to address circularity.
Yes, that would be fine.
We've since a year, just a bit more than a year, we've had our circular economy action plan up and running, and we're implementing that now. And I think there are three main facets or elements of that which are worth really drawing attention to. The first is that we take a very systemic approach, and the first time we did this, I guess, was in the plastic strategy in 2018, where we really tried to address all stages of the product cycle. And this year we will be addressing textiles, fashion and textiles, and circular electronics. And next year we will be going on to deal with construction and construction products. But the idea is really that we're a regulator. We produce legislation, and legislation also, it obviously has a very important economic effect, not just in punishing polluters, but also in providing certainty for investors and for businesses, and providing a level playing field and a clear direction. But what we've tried to do with plastic strategies, and we will try to do with the future strategies, is to also get the economics right. So looking at how to ensure steady public and private demand and public and private investment, and also creating the right incentives along the value chains, because quite often the problem might be in one place, but the solution is somewhere else, and quite often you need to bridge those split incentives. So that's one thing, the sort of systemic approach. The second that I would focus on, and I could maybe talk about this in more detail later if people are interested, is the focus on the product. And I think this is really groundbreaking and fundamental. We for the first time, I think, anywhere, we're using single market tools to address sustainability and circularity. And the idea is that, in Europe, we are big consumers. We've got 450 million consumers, and we have tools to be able to control, or at least have minimum standards for what we allow on our markets. And as we said earlier, I think design is so important in sustainability. It really defines a lot of what happens later in the value chain. And if we can get rid of the most wasteful, damaging, and worst performing products from the European market, that will really be a very powerful tool, and I can go on to explain how that will work if we have time. But the third thing, I think, which is important and maybe relevant for all the participants today, is the focus on consumers. And we are looking with our colleagues in the Justice Directorate General, working on consumer law. We're looking at how we can make a reality a proposal for a right to repair, and the right to have access to spare parts, for example. And also we're looking at how to tackle the cynicism that has grown amongst consumers about green claims. There are so many labels around these days. Of course, the EU Eco label is the gold standard, but there's a lot of confusion, and we are working to see how we can actually oblige anybody making a green claim about a product to be obliged to be able to back that up with data, life cycle data. So all of that is feeding into our climate objectives and feeding into our recovery plans and sort of stimulus funding for which we're rolling out at the moment with member states. So there we go. I can also come back later maybe and respond to what Salamari was saying about the digital side, because I think that's something which we're working on as well, and I'd be happy to expand on that.
Thank you, William. I understand that Thierry is now on the phone. Are we able to have a line with Thierry? So Thierry, hello, welcome.
Yes.
Great, we hear you and we see you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well. Thank you. So Thierry, can you
okay,
share with us?
I have to apologize, but yeah, I have to apologize, but I have a good reason for being a bit disconnected. Is that my wife is giving birth in a few hours now, and I have to move back to the hospital. So apologize for that. It's a good reason. It's a sustainable reason.
Congratulations.
Basically, so just in thank you. In short, and I'm very happy of what was just said before, talking about the right to repair and talking about focusing on the customer. As you present us before, Nexus is an international trading group acting in the automotive industry, but especially in the automotive aftermarket industry. We're basically working in 145 countries, and we represent more than 2,600 distributors all over the world. I think sustainability and circular economy are something which are radical and fundamental importance under our industry. Our industry is very probably the most fragmented and the most traditional distribution sectors that is still existing today, with more than 45 distributors and wholesalers existing only in Europe, more than 350,000 distributors all over the world, but it's approximatively, because in China it's difficult to count. And basically, talking about circularity, I would like to say that first of all, we have to, in our industry, we have to pay attention on the fact that this different level of focus that has been done under the different continent on circularity. That means you have far more advanced situation in North America, for example, as compared to Europe in our side. And it asked me the question about what's the impact and what's the challenge on circularity in our industry. I would like just to say that, first of all, was it a focus up to 2 years ago, talking sustainability and circularity in traditional industry? The answer was definitely no. It was not a focus up to a few months ago, a few years ago. Is it a challenge that we all need to tackle in the near future? And we bring some new opportunity for the wholesalers. It bring new business development for our industry, coming from the workshops up to the manufacturers. Definitely yes, and definitely it's one of the key focus that we're trying to address, trying to find new ecosystem and trying to find new business model. So how important is circularity today? I would like to say that circularity is becoming one of the most important topics on which one we are talking about, because it brings a lot of new challenges toward a traditional fragmented distribution sectors. But was it before something that was really the strong focus? I would like to say definitely no. And if we have been committed also with some initiative like Circular Car Initiative or whatsoever, it's because we want prepared a network of wholesalers who need to be better trained and better understand what means circularity and what is the business model about it around that.
Thank you, Thierry, for sharing the perspective from the automotive sector. I'd like to turn to Dorothée now. Dorothée, you have presented the importance of the chemical wholesale distributors and highlighted the importance of SMEs and the traditional anchorage of those SMEs. Can you share a few examples, concrete examples, about what in practice the circular economy means in chemical distribution?
Yeah, of course, I could spend the whole afternoon to tell you about certain examples, ranging from packaging, using the same kind of material or transportation means for a multitude of different business transactions and so on. But since we have different wholesale ecosystems here, then let me focus on the chemicals part, possibly. We have some of our members who have spearheaded and piloted a special new model in Denmark, together with the colleagues from our National Danish Association, in a project called GEAR, which was also supported by the Danish Environmental Agency. And the project, let's be non-technical, because I think not all the audience will consist of chemical engineers, most likely. So in very generic words, solvents and acids were the chemicals which were subject to this project. It's widely used solvents and acids as major chemicals for a multitude of different applications. And usually, after the first production process with those chemicals, they would have been disposed as waste. Because after this first production process in a different customer business, the purity would not have been good enough, again, to use it. So what the distributors are specialized at, and what is definitely in our DNA, is to have a very specific knowledge about value chains. So which kind of value chains and which kind of players in different value chains can take up this specific product for a different production run. So, and this was the, let's say, also the success of this project, where actually the distributors knew, okay, there is a completely different value chain, but we think this value chain could still use this product. Even now it has, for example, not anymore a purity of 90%, but let's say of 70%. So they contacted the players of the other value chains, and they piloted successfully to give this product into a second production process. And then after the second time, usually at the latest, it would have been disposed as waste. But again, the distributors, our member companies, and we are really proud of that, went to other value chain partners and said, hey, we think you could use that for your production process. Although, unfortunately, now the purity is, let's say, 50% or 40%. Could you try? And they did, and it worked out. So, and that had actually a circularity kind of character for a couple of production runs until the product was really completely done and could really not be used anymore. But in the meantime, it had, let's say, 7 or 8 product life cycles rather than in previous times only one. And this saves a lot of waste, obviously. It saves a lot of emissions. It also saves a lot of other topics like resource of all kinds, also energy and so on, because you can always use the same product. And this is a model that will be now rolled out in the second phase of this project to other chemicals. So we started with some of the most frequently used ones, but we now roll it out also to other chemicals and see that we get the same success. And that is, for us, it was also, let's say, not only showcasing the circular economy model, but also what our sector specifically can do to facilitate and implement in practice circular economy business models, and even give it as an opportunity approach, not only a new life, but also a new business life for our members.
Extraordinary, superb examples of current thinking about the circular economy and how wholesalers can help. Salamari, you mentioned digitization. I'll get there. Digitization to build the circular.
Yeah, that's an awful word.
So how does that work in practice in your sector?
Yes, I'm not quite sure whether it's the sector-wide in the EU, but at least what I've learned, it's on the northern part of Europe. Most of our countries and the associations have built some kind of digital product information databases. And for instance, us, STK in Finland, we have had this product database, sähkönumerot.fi, for already 50 years. So there's another reason for us to party later this year when we can hopefully get together. Of course, the product database in the beginning was not in a digital format because we didn't have internet then. It was more like a product catalog with a lot of information, but it has been in the digital format for almost 20 years now. And that allows because when you have reliable data on product qualities and on environmental parameters, that's the basis of sustainable decisions and product selection at various stages of the product life cycle. And this may not sound super fancy, but knowing that electrotechnical products are, cables, inverters, KNX, lighting, that usually remain at base in a bigger infrastructure or a building construction. So they are not easily reused as such. But now that we know what the components are, so at the end of the life cycle of, let's say, office building, you can reuse the components and safely rip it apart and maybe take at least the materials there to be reused. But if you didn't know what was there in the first place, you just couldn't do anything much. And I think that's efficiency thing, just like William said, and that's safety thing, considering the environment. And of course, it makes sense that you can have the valuable components and materials in the end to be used again.
Thank you, Salamari. Again, tremendous experience and projects. Thierry, you're back with us, I understand. Can you say from your perspective, what are the key difficulties in concrete terms in the automotive spare part sector? Thierry, are you back with us? Not yet. I think we'll come back to Thierry afterwards. But in the meantime, William, so Salamari mentioned digitalization. 1, 2, 3. We'll get there. And you mentioned the Commission's initiatives on the sustainable product initiatives and the digital passport. Can you say a few words about what is the approach the Commission is taking on those things, and how wholesalers can benefit?
With pleasure. I'm laughing a little bit because I think I've never seen a better excuse for not being able to be present, and I'm hoping that Thierry isn't expecting that he would have to take us into the hospital with him. But yes, I'm happy to try and explain a little bit more. I said already that the sustainable product initiative is really quite groundbreaking because we're using single market instruments, and why it's so effective, because a small or almost zero cost modification at the design stage can really save huge amounts of money and enable major savings and future business possibilities later on in the life cycle. An example would be a washing machine. If you make it so that you can take out the electronics very easily, when it goes to the recyclers, they don't throw everything into the shredder. They take out the electronics and they can recycle the copper separately, which also means that the steel isn't contaminated with the copper. So it takes absolutely nothing to design it differently. You just make sure you can withdraw it. But why would a producer normally think of doing that? So it's about that's just to give an example of why design can be so important. We have the tools to do that. I mean, Eco Design Directive has existed for a while, but it's only been applied to energy using equipment and products, and only really used for energy efficiency in the use phase. Now, what we're planning, and we should adopt this by the end of this year, we're at the moment doing our impact assessments and so on. We have a public consultation, by the way, which is open till the 9th of June. So if you haven't already responded to that individually or via Eurocommerce, I would encourage you to do that. We are planning in the Sustainable Products Initiative to expand the scope of the Eco Design Directive. That is the fundamental part of it. So it could be applied to everything from furniture to textiles and building products to soap or whatever. And it will be aimed at achieving all kinds of sustainability objectives. So extending product lifetimes, improving overall circularity, recycled content, for example, enabling remanufacturing, reducing emissions, and so on. And of course, I mean, there may be some horizontal sustainability criteria, but it will be very much product group by product group, because of course every product group is immensely different in terms of the design requirements. And I think we'll be using implementing acts for each product group. the sustainable products initiative is part of a wider sustainable product framework, and we're also looking at consumer angle, which I explained earlier. I can talk about that if you like, but I'll maybe go straight to the digital stuff, because I think that a very powerful tool that we're bringing in, which should be of great interest to wholesalers, obviously is from what we've heard from Salamari, is a digital product passport. I've said that circular economy is about value retention, and so much of the value of any product now is bound up in the data that's linked to it, and even data that is generated by the product as it travels through its life. And as Salamari said, sectors have been keeping this information in catalogs for 50 years, in databases for 20 years, and they know their products are best. But that data gets lost. It doesn't travel with the product. It's not accessible to those who need it when they need it through the value chain. And the idea of the digital product passport is really to attach the data to the product. And it'll consist basically of two things. One is just a unique identifier, a bit like GS1 uses for the, on the barcodes, or you could use QR code, you could use whatever. And then a set of requirements to make data available, accessible in relation to that product. So you'd have a kind of URL which would take you to the data once you have the identifier. The technology is there, it's available, it's cheap, it's non-proprietary, and you've been using track and tracing and identifiers for decades, I think, in the wholesale sector. I think what will be more challenging is getting the balance right between access to information and the protection of intellectual property and privacy. So that's, I mean, we've just published actually today our Data Governance Act, or the proposal for it, in a public consultation. So that's worth taking a look at. But actually, I mean, we're not going to be asking for reams of new data to be inputted. What we're talking about is very much a use case driven approach. So we're only looking to identify the bits of data which are very important to have in order to be able to keep that value in the system. And as I say, most of that exists already. And we're looking not to have it on a big server in a commission building in Brussels, but in a distributed fashion. So, it could just be on a server of whatever. It could be in Salamari's database that she already has, that it would just need to be made accessible. And I see this being used particularly for business to business use. And we will probably start pretty small in terms of what kind of data we focus on. But I would actually expect that once you have that identifier on each product or each batch of products in the economy, the possibilities are limitless for private actors to then use that amongst themselves. I mean, without the Commission even knowing about it, to actually generate those value chain coordination, which can only really happen if the data is made available. So I don't know, maybe for solvent reuse, this could be a powerful and useful tool if you know what solvents are in what products, and if you're able to do that not just for one value chain, like Dorothy was saying, but maybe it's for a completely different product that you want to use it. If you know that, if it's on the digital product passport that solvent is in that product, maybe then you can use that information to then be able to actually identify the products that it can be used for. So this is the importance of data, I think, for circular economy. I think it's going to be very big. We've just used the first, well, it's being piloted with the batteries regulation, which we adopted a few months ago and is now in co-decision. That's the first attempt to use it, but now we're looking at really rolling it out to a wide gamut of products.
Thank you, William. I understand that Thierry has joined us again.
Okay.
And because Thierry, during the prep session, you mentioned the importance of data and digitalization for your sector. I cannot hear him. Salamari, I think you wanted to react.
Yes, I wanted. Of course, I would love to give the floor to Thierry if we are lucky enough to have him on stage. But what William just said, it's kind of relieving, but still I would like to emphasize on behalf of the wholesalers on the electrotechnical field that I would like to remind and maybe if necessary later to show you guys what we have done for quite a few decades already. And there is internationally, for instance, ITIM classification standard, the European Technical Information Model, which our system also is relevant with. And I would strongly urge the cooperation nationally as well as internationally in the construction field, for instance, so that there would be a uniform product classification and data, and thus the value chain could avoid having to fill in the product information for each market and each database repeatedly. And what we fear, but William, that was relieving. What we feared was that, oh no, now the government or the EU is going to have us to fill in the information again to another database and trying to make the most out of updating it. We have interfaces in place already, at least in Finland, so that, for instance, the CAD planning software can use the product information already, so that on that side, the information of the product that is used in the construction goes all the way to the building owner. And I would really, really like to show this later, how it's working and what are the bits of data within the standard, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel again.
So not reinventing the wheel is the key message here. I understand, I'm told that Thierry is back on stage. Thierry, are you able
Maybe
to...
just whilst we wait, I could just reply just to that point. I think that we're very aware. I mean, those of you like Dorothée that are working in the chemicals area will know the experience of the SCIP database and a lot of companies that in terms of chemical registering information and data on chemicals, a lot of companies were not very happy about the extra work that involved. We are looking at an interface approach. Just as Salamari was mentioning, we have our data space, European data spaces, not databases, but data spaces, which are really supposed to be interfaces of existing data. So things like the SCIP database data, product environmental footprinting data, existing data from different places, plus the product generated data would be sort of meeting in that interface and accessible via it. So the idea is certainly not to have to input data many times, but we need to have some kind of protocol. We need to get the stakeholders around the table to agree the protocol so that everybody's using the same language and classification and so on, and that'll be a bit of a challenge.
Dorothée, yes, please.
Yes, William, that is very soothing, I have to say, that you put the stakeholders around the table, because just by listening to the different data formats which are already in place, I get somehow dizzy, I have to say. It seems to be a data jungle. I mean, we don't have a lack of data, but we have a lack of standardized formats to use. Yeah. And I mean, we represent mainly small and medium-sized enterprises. You mentioned SCIP, the database. We get more and more, let's say, data filling exercises, but not necessarily always with the value added. Yeah. So I think that is something that you are also working on. I think you realized this already at the Commission, and we are very happy that you take this up. But it would be really, really helpful before everybody now invents their own solutions, to bring the stakeholders around the table and really to give a certain approach on certain standardized efforts, so that the sectors have at least a common starting point. Yeah, because otherwise we will all drift away and it becomes a jungle, and then the objectives are not met either. So the efforts, I think we would all better put into bringing this thing into implementation, rather than trying to fill 20,000 different data forms. So that is highly appreciated what you said, and I think you find you push against open doors with us here. We'll be immediately there and help you.
I'll see you at the table.
Pleasure.
Thank you. That's a wonderful achievement of this discussion. Shall we just move on? So your sectors, Dorothée and Salamari, you've shared examples about how you're engaging, why it is important. Now, obviously, it's not easy. Can you share a few examples of the barriers that you're facing and how the European Union can help? So the digital passport or digitization, B2B data sharing, that's one that we have identified. Are there others that you can share for the audience?
Yes, this is now that William has soothed our minds, me and Dorothea, about that, yes, we'll meet at the table and there will not be another database that our member organizations would have to maintain and fill in. So there goes one fear. But there are new challenges indeed. And for instance, in the near future in Finland, we will be required to pass on data on the carbon footprint of any components of a construction. That means also the electrotechnical components, even though they are just a small part, it's part of the carbon footprint of a building. And we definitely need a common way of calculating the carbon footprint for each product. It could be the EPDs that we've heard about, in a commercial product, or it could be the life levels if that goes on. I don't know whether you can shed some light on that, William, but that's a new challenge that we definitely understand the importance of it. But it would be awful if one has to calculate each and every cable and products and inverter on each country that you are selling it to or that you're importing it from. So there has to be a common way of calculating that is accepted Europe-wide, so that we can agree on that and not build any, let's say, trade barriers within the EU, the single market.
Thank you, Salamari. Dorothée?
Yes. First of all, I can, of course, echo what Salamari has already said. It's really standardization and methodology is definitely needed, and also in data formats. The other thing that we are struggling with is the waste directives or the waste regulation, which varies by country to country, but even within the country by regions and even municipalities. I've mentioned that our project started in Denmark, and Denmark alone has 98 municipalities who define what is waste and what is not waste. So, and this kind of different standards, different views, this makes life extremely cumbersome for somebody who wants to use waste as a useful resource. And partly it's not only the variation of regulation, but it's also the, let's say, the uncertainty of what is in the pipeline in future regulation packages. Our output from the project will reach compliance. So from that side, we are okay. But there is also this interface between REACH and the waste directive and the waste regulation, which needs further clarification. And also we have some overlapping regulations, which I have to say leads to a certain view of a jungle as well. So whatever can be done to reduce the complexity there, especially for the small and medium-sized enterprises who don't have armadas of regulatory affairs and product stewards in the house, they have to create turnover and to especially now with COVID-19 and liquidity crunches and so on, to really, let's say, put all the efforts also to the business. So without reducing or compromising on compliance, it would be helpful if that could be somehow harmonized Europe-wide. And I think this is a major obstacle for the European Green Deal's objectives to be met, and especially if you put the circular economy into practice mode.
Thank you, Dorothée. I hear Thierry is there for last time, a last try. Thierry? Hello. No, it seems to be very... Oh, there you are.
Yes, I have a lot of troubles to have connection, but anyway, I apologize for that.
No, we appreciate the effort and the
No,
circumstances. But maybe as we skipped a bit your contribution here and there, can you say something about
sure.
your concrete challenges and obstacles and how the EU can help?
Yeah, okay. The key challenges in our industry, which is a very fragmented industry, as I said before, is first of all the knowledge of the circularity and the knowledge and the identification of the real business model for all the different layers of our distribution sector. Definitely, when you talk about difficulty, and it was mentioned, I think, before a little bit, I think one of the key elements in terms of difficulty is the fact that there is a significant missing of definition of how we should, what we should call a green product in our industry. Are we talking about a remanufacturing product? Are we talking about a repaired product? Are we talking about a new product with specific specification that can fit to some standard in the industry? And this is something which is one of the key difficulty in a market where it's also not so easy to identify the right product. The second element I would like to say on the difficulty for us linked to circularity is the knowledge. The knowledge and the training that are needed in order to better educate, to better give the real knowledge and understanding to the wholesalers, to the workshops, and to the user about the need of more of and the need of using more circular products in the way we go and in the way we act for repairing the different vehicles. The third difficulty we face in our industry is moving an industry from a very traditional organization sectors, hyper competitive sectors, if I can say, to movement. You are talking about telematics. We like to talk about mobility. We like to talk about the way the model is changing on the usage of the car. We like to talk about electric vehicle, about all the different
Oh, the line's broken again.
Oh.
Yeah, I have a notification that that the line is broken. But I think we heard some of the key messages. Some of the key messages in terms of the lack of definition, the importance of incentivizing
Yes.
consumers. Oh, there you are. And
Yeah. I'm very sorry. And
I'm sorry, I think we will have
no,
to...
just to try to conclude on that one is the fact that
I'm sorry, we will have to close it. I think that the last point that Thierry was making was the importance of moving the sector and getting the sector to move into a more circular circular model, given the traditional and very fragmented structure of the sector. Neil, William, you're back here. So
Yes.
you've heard all of those experiences and testimonies and points from the wholesalers in the panel. How does that resonate? What do you see? How the Commission can the Commission help? We've heard quite a few things, and in particular the open door, which we appreciate very much. But maybe you want to have a last word on those points.
Yeah, I mean, I come back a little bit to the fact that we can use legislation, but a lot of it is about getting the incentives right. But also, I'm picking up a lot of it is about the information transfer and the data. And just to reply a little bit more directly to what Salamai and Dorothée were saying, and what I think Thierry was trying to get across. When it comes to measuring emissions, it is difficult, and particularly these scope 3 emissions, as we call them, the ones that are not within the power of the person putting the products on the market. They're embodied in the components and the materials that are in their products, and it's quite difficult to measure that. I hope that the digital product passport would be one way of helping that, because of course that data should be coming from downstream and going upstream, and it should be possible for OEMs and so on to actually require their suppliers to provide that kind of data in accessible formats. And I think one of the biggest lacuna, one of the thing that's really missing the most when we're looking at emissions is the embodied emissions. You mentioned the sort of construction sector in Finland having to make this information available, and I've been looking at a lot of the recovery and resilience plans from member states coming in, talking about renovation wave and construction, and they all miss the importance of embodied emissions, and we have to keep reminding them, saying, look, that the energy that is bound up in the materials that you use to construct the building, it takes 20 years of using a building before you've equaled it in terms of the operating energy. So if you don't address that, you're missing a huge part of the puzzle. And we have our in the construction area, we have a new measuring tool Europe-wide, which has been piloted in about 120 different construction sites, and we're now trying to get people to use it, called Levels. You can Google that for more information. When it comes to waste, the definition of waste should be fairly clear and Europe-wide, and we also, for certain areas, we have end of waste criteria, which proved to be quite difficult to do for certain areas. We tried, but there are so many interests pulling in different ways that we haven't gone very much further with that. And in general, the waste legislation should be fairly stable now. We did a big review in 2018, and there are some sort of secondary bits of legislation coming through, like on packaging at the moment. We've got the the interpretation, the guidance documents for single-use plastics and for essential requirements and so on. And next year we've got actually for Thierry, the end-of-life vehicles directive review. But in general, hopefully the legislative area is fairly stable. I think where we really need to work on is not changing the legislation, but implementing it better. And there we really need to be pushing the member states. And for Thierry, I think when it comes to green mobility and what is a green product, and how we can deal with the obvious mutations of the mobility sector. I mean, people are going to be owning cars less. We'll probably have fewer cars on the streets, but they'll be used far more intensively. They'll probably be repaired a lot more and last longer, especially electric vehicles that have fewer moving parts and so on. We're already looking, as I say, at the review of the end-of-life vehicle directive next year. That already requires producers to provide dismantling information for each type of vehicle. It provides that manufacturers of the components used in vehicles have to make available information on dismantling and storage and testing of components and so on. And in the review, I think that we'll be looking at a lot at how we can use information requirements to address those problems, and also some of the sort of locked-in parts, parts which are designed so that you can't actually do anything with them once they, you can't give them a second life. We also need to look at how we harvest components, not just the recycling of the materials, and this is true in many areas, electronics and so on. I think a product passport would be integral, though. As I said, that we're testing it first on the electric vehicle batteries. The batteries regulation requires all electric vehicle batteries from the 1st of January 2026 to have an identifier on them. And in the annex to the regulation, you already see set out what data has to be made available. The business-to-business data, which is for the economic actors, which can be encrypted. The business-to-consumer information, which has to be open as a default in any case, and then the business-to-government information, which is more to do with compliance and so on. A lot of that information is dynamic. It's not just something that you say about what is in the product. You can actually look at the efficiency of a battery and say, okay, when it's 65 or 70% efficient, we take it from being an electric vehicle and we use it for energy storage. And that information can also make the market work. The transaction can happen at the right time. You can accurately get up to a good price for the transfer from the vehicle owner to the energy company. So it's really getting that value back and really making it much more efficient and effective. So I think when we start applying the digital product passport more widely, it will be really quite powerful. And when it comes to what is green and what is not green, I mentioned the green claims work that we're doing, but I think another interesting area is the taxonomy. We're working in the Commission with stakeholders, NGOs and businesses to try and define what is green when it comes to financing. And it is really hard work. It's really tough work. We're going into quite a lot of detail, and I'm involved in the sector team which is working on motor manufacturing, and we're looking at, do we look at the process and say, okay, if you want to be considered as green, you're not allowed to inhibit third-party repair. You have to make these bits of information available, or at least to authorized professionals. So I think taxonomy is another area where we are starting to get into that level of detail, and we can really start saying, well, what is green and what isn't green? And we're just doing it in terms of financing at the moment, but I think that will have impacts in the future across a lot of other areas of legislation.
Thank you, William. And indeed, getting the regulatory framework right will be important to encourage and promote more circularity. We have 1 more minute left. Dorothée and Salamari, would you like to have a closing word?
Sure. Dorothée, you want to go first? Okay. I only have a tiny bit to conclude. Like I said in the beginning, I think we guys in Finland have shown you, and with the ITIM, the Northern Europeans have shown that the wholesale industry can and has contributed to circularity with the existing data. And we have been doing and are willing to do it together with the suppliers and customers finally. So we're open to discussions, and we would really like to show our work and the taxonomy or the standards that we have been using in our industry.
Thank you, Salamari. Dorothée?
Yeah, actually, I can just echo what Salamari has already said. Thank you to William also for your openness. We are happy to contribute. I think that came out very clearly. And yeah, together, let's make it work and turn it into an opportunity and not into a threat.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you to you 3 and 4 for a very insightful discussion on circularity and the role of wholesalers. We've heard great examples of projects of wholesalers driving the agenda, pilot testing, and but also sharing the difficulties and how the European Union can help. So I really, really enjoyed the discussion with you today. Our next panel now will be at 16:30. So stay with us. You have a 30 minutes break, and we'll join again at 4:30 on a panel on the role of wholesalers in the economy. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice afternoon. Bye.